Hi, I'm Andy, and this is my lesson on conditional statements in Java. In this lesson, I'll show you how to incorporate decision making into your programs by using the keywords if and else. Let's get started. Just about every computer program in existence contains code so it can make decisions. The most basic decision-making keywords in computer programs are the words if and else. Here's the start of a basic program that shows you how those keywords are used. This code asks the user to enter their average in a class. The purpose of this program is to determine their letter grade based on that average. First, let's figure out if the student deserves an A. Let's run the program and see what happens when we enter averages both greater than 90 and then less than 90. Notice how an if statement works. First, this Boolean expression is evaluated. If it evaluates to true, all the code inside these curly braces executes. If it evaluates to false, this block of code is entirely skipped over. So when we entered an average less than 90, this block of code was skipped and the program basically did nothing. Okay, let's enhance our program a bit. I wanted to print the message, "You did not get an A," if the average is less than 90. To do that, we need to put a block of code right here that only executes if the if block did not execute. The keyword that does this is else. You can think of else as meaning otherwise. Its block of code only executes if the Boolean expression in the preceding if statement evaluated to false. Let's see how that works. Now let's add some more detail to our program. I want to determine the student's exact letter grade, not just whether they got an A or not. To do that, we'll first make a string reference called letter grade, but we won't assign it to a string object quite yet. The purpose of the rest of the program will be to assign the correct letter to letter grade. To do that, we need some more if statements. First, let's do that the wrong way. Sometimes it's good to look at imperfect code and understand why it's flawed. This code isn't terrible, but the problem is we don't want each and every one of these Boolean expressions to evaluate when we run our code. As soon as one of these expressions evaluates to true, we want to skip over the rest. Remember, that's what the else keyword does. It only evaluates if the preceding Boolean expression evaluated to false. So let's put else in front of all these ifs so they are skipped over as soon as a Boolean expression evaluates to true. This can be confusing, so let me walk through the code in some detail. Suppose the user enters an average of 93. Since this Boolean expression evaluates to true, its block of code executes, and all the remaining else blocks are skipped over. It doesn't even matter if their expressions are true. They're not even evaluated. Now suppose the user enters an average of 63. First, this expression evaluates. Since it's false, the program skips the code inside the if's curly braces and moves down to the else. This if is also false, so the next one is evaluated. Finally, a true statement is found. After its block of code is executed, the remaining if isn't even evaluated. That entire block is skipped. Before running our program and testing it out, let's make one final improvement. We want our code to handle the case of a user entering invalid data, like a negative number. That means we need a final else statement that executes if none of the preceding ifs turned out to be true. Like this. In general, but not always, you'll want to end a series of if and else if statements with a final else block, so you're ensured something happens when the if-else blocks of code execute. Notice that the purpose of all these blocks of code is to create a string object and store its address and letter grade. So by adding this final else, we are guaranteeing that letter grade gets assigned to an actual string object. Okay, let's run our program and make sure it works for a variety of situations. So that's the basics of how programs can make decisions by evaluating if and else statements. Before we go, let's get a bit of practice with if and else by analyzing another program. Here's the code we want to work with. Take a moment to study it. Then I'll run the code and I want you to predict what prints out for a variety of inputs. Okay, first I'll enter 4. Notice both of these lines of code executed. That's because there's no else here. So the evaluation of this if was not skipped, even though the preceding if was true. Since there's no else here, these two sections of code are decoupled. They aren't really linked at all. The execution of one has nothing to do with the execution of the other. Okay, let's see what happens when we enter 2. Let's walk through exactly what happened here. First, this line executed because num was less than 5. Then, again because there's no else here, this expression was evaluated. It evaluated to false. So then this expression was evaluated. It also turned out to be false. And since that expression evaluated to false, the code inside the final else block executed. Okay, last one. Let's see what happens when we enter 5. In this case, the expression for the first if statement was false, and its block of code was skipped over. Then this expression was evaluated, and it was also found to be false. That means this if expression was then evaluated. That expression also turned out to be false, so the program executed whatever was in the final else block, this code here. So that's how you analyze if and else if blocks of code. Remember to analyze the Boolean expression first, and if it turns out to be true, mentally execute its code, and then skip over any else blocks it's linked with. And that wraps up this lesson on if and else in Java. I'm Andy. Thanks for watching and coding with me today.